are going to be part of history today. Because today, Dr. Rao is going to make an announcement about a study that he has just concluded. Thank you. Dr. Rao. Is Katie going to see some Greenpeace? Come on down, Katie. And down. And John Seeger, the president of Population Connection. And of course, Jane. Let's hear it for Ingrid and her mom, Sonia, who made all of this happen. So it's thanks to social media and the Chelsea Film Festival and others that were able to get the word out. So thank you. You are going to be part of history because today, Dr. Rao is going to make an announcement about a study that he has just concluded that proves that animal agriculture is responsible for 87% of greenhouse gases. I will say no more. I hand it to you.
It's amazing to be here with everybody and to see this amazing film which talks about just how vital it is for us to pay attention and to start living in a way that is aligned with our values, aligned with our interests, aligned with our conscience.
The moral position is to resist this and to end it.
People need to know that this is the reality.
What's the problem?
So we have a system that's based on, making money off death, disease, and destruction. It's something that we have never, ever faced before.
The trees are going up in flames.
We have 10 years to turn it around.
The Earth is telling us we have to change.
Inside of here is my daughter. I want her to have a good planet to live on, not just a planet to live on, because this planet will survive us.
This affects everything.
That's the only way out that we have. That's the only way out where I see light.
Again, it's the #1 thing you can do to reduce climate change.
And I totally recommend it.
Yeah, it is historic. In 20, 30 years, you'll have all our friends hitting us up being like, yo, you're a visionary.
It is a fight against ignorance and apathy.
Moin.
The activism that is happening is, I think, critical and timely, and with the new research that Dr. Rao is going to talk about here, even more timely. And how can we create a vegan world by 2026? Some of us might think that's pretty quick, and it is, but things happen in some cases very quickly and exponentially. And I think that's kind of what we need to get to at this juncture, given the status of things. I guess we'll just go right to Dr. Rao with the announcement of the study, and then we'll have a discussion from there.
Thanks a lot. The study happened because of Jane.
That's okay.
She asked me to do a white paper on animal agriculture. Because I was telling her, there are all these inaccuracies. And she said, you have to put it down in a white paper. So it forced me to go and look at things again. And then when we calculated, correct for all the errors that have been made in mainstream IPCC reports actually. Then we put it together, you realize it's 87% of all greenhouse gas emissions are coming from this one sector. So literally, if we can turn the whole world vegan today, we can cut down our greenhouse gas emissions by 87%. Isn't that amazing? Woo! So don't let anyone tell you that we cannot reverse climate change. We can reverse it. We just have to choose to do it.
And there's belief systems, there's structures in place that are allowing this current fear-based system that you had referenced in the film. And as a longtime vegan, also in the film it was referenced how we have been sort of made fun of and joked about as, oh, those crazy vegans. But there was recently a New York Times article, many of you may have seen it, with a headline, "To Stop Mocking Vegans." Right? So mainstream press is starting to come around. And it's also noted in the film, there are gatekeepers to allowing information out. And films like this and events like this and people like all of us are part of the voice that needs to be out in the world. So how are we going to do it, I guess, is the thing. And with Greenpeace, I believe there's been now a push towards reducing meat at least, right? And Greenpeace being a large environmental organization, one of the ongoing things is to kind of connect animal rights environmentalism, ethical and sustainable living. And so there's these convergences now of all these issues. I don't know if you want to talk at all about that.
Sure. So we do have a meat and dairy campaign now, and we're also looking at the fossil fuel industry side of things for climate change. So, like you said, there are connections to this. Of course, the unlocalization of our food sources, gas guzzling, farm equipment, all kinds of things like that. But we also know that when we look at the fossil fuels that we're currently in production, so that are in the ground, but we're currently trying to get at, if we burn all that oil, coal, and gas, we hit that 1.5 degrees Celsius number. We blow right past it. So our focus of our campaign is on the fossil fuel industry, also keeping the oceans healthy, as they mentioned in your film. Overfishing and other practices are going to mean that the oceans can't protect us as much as they should, and deforestation as well. So there are a lot of connections.
And then the fossil fuel industry, a huge part of that goes into animal agriculture, right? And also to make petrochemical fertilizers, to grow the corn and the soy. So getting at that also connects to animal agriculture.
Absolutely.
On the population side, so there's more people on the planet now than there have ever been, and I guess we're projected to get up to about 11 billion or so. So how does that issue connect with all these issues as well?
Well, there are more people on the planet than there ever been, and that compares to when you said it, because the population is higher now than it was 30 seconds ago. One way to look at this is this. Our species has been around for maybe several 100,000 years. It took all of that time until 1800 to get to 1 billion. Today we add 1 billion every dozen years. There's a debate that's gone on for centuries as to how many people the Earth can support. And there's no answer to it. In fact, an eminent researcher came to the conclusion that the only way to answer that question, and it ties in with the topic today, is how do you want to live and how do you want everybody else to live? And that doesn't just include people. It includes all the other critters. I just want to put in one word, though, for an important element here, if you will, category. There are hundreds of millions of women today in the world who are little more than property. Little more than property. Many in the developing world. There are 214 million women in the developing world today who don't want to be pregnant but face barriers to contraception. It's never, ever, ever about telling them what to do. But if we can break down those barriers and enable them to have the lives they want and to have children when and if they choose, it's only going to make these other goals easier to solve.
Largely a reflection of our relationship with others, right? Is it one of respect and mutuality, or is it one of extraction? And that also has to do with our relationship with the earth. Are we going to live in a way that's sustainable and mutually beneficial, or in a way that is destructive and extractive? And yet this concept of moving towards co-creating a culture of nonviolence and moving out of this existing system of violence, and makes all the sense in the world, and the big question then comes down to, as in the film, how do we do it? So I wonder if you have some thoughts on that.
In the movie was the beginning of our thought process on this. How do we go about doing it? We have a conference happening next week where we are going to go forward with the next steps. Because in any major system transformation like this, you need to have infrastructure, new institutions, a new constitution, a new currency, new way of relating to each other, because that's what currency is. Right now, our currency system is forcing us to grow all the time. It's forcing growth on us as the mechanism for prosperity, so to speak. Because it's basically a system that builds domination into it. Because it's all new currencies only created in the form of loans. And once you do that, you already have an adversarial relationship with human beings, and then between human beings and the earth, between human beings and animals. The currency system itself makes us act the way we act. By changing that, you change our culture. This is what Buckminster Fuller said, you don't change people's minds by forcing them. You basically give them a tool, the use of which will change the way they think.
And what are the tools that are currently in place that perhaps can be strengthened and exercised along that line? Are there some tools that you're thinking about that we see the beginning indications of?
So there's vegan institutions, there's vegan infrastructure, you have to build vegan constitution, a vegan currency, and there are elements of each of those already there. People have been working on different currency systems. People have been working on a constitution. There's something called codes.earth, which just says that the purpose of governance should be to ensure the health and vitality of the planet and all its inhabitants for generations to come. The purpose of governance is not to maintain the property of other people. Okay? So once you change the core that you're building from, that's how you create a system of normalized nonviolence. I mean, how do you give women freedom? You have to have a system of normalized nonviolence.
I would like to jump in and say a couple of things. One of the things that I noticed going to the climate strike recently was that there was this sense that, well, let's not talk about animal agriculture. Let's just talk about fossil fuels and coal. And that's all based on this notion that animal agriculture, as widely cited, is 14.5% of greenhouse gases. Now, that was an estimate that many in the scientific community even considered very low. And then the World Bank came out and said, no, it's 51%. And again, that was something that the gatekeepers essentially did not allow out. You're saying it's even larger than that. Right. And also, it shouldn't be necessarily a competition between the two. But is there a reason, in your opinion, Dr. Rao, that animal agriculture's impact is being suppressed? MSNBC did, 3 or 4 days of climate change discussion, which I applauded and I watched and I thought it was great, but I didn't see a lot of talk about animal agriculture's impact. Ditto for all the other major networks. I'm not singling them out. The New York Times have done thousands of articles on climate change, but the impact of animal agriculture is something that essentially the powers that be don't discuss much. Can you elaborate on that? Because I think that's an important part of the equation.
The animal agriculture is the foundation of the system of normalized violence that we live on today. It's the foundation of the system. So the system does not want to talk about the foundation, because if you throw away the foundation, the whole system will collapse. This is why they protect it at all times. FAO did this analysis that said it's 18% in 2006, and then the World Bank scientists looked at all the errors in the FAO's analysis and said, look, you just correct for the errors, it becomes 51%. So that's what they did, right? And then the FAO and the World Bank scientists had a debate about it in scientific journal, Animal Feed Science and Technology Journal. So the FAO scientists wrote a paper attacking the 51% result, and then Gurler and Anand rebutted it. And after the rebuttal, the editor asked the FAO scientists to continue the debate, and they declined to continue the debate. So at that point, you say they have lost the debate. Yeah. Scientifically, that's the way it is. They have lost the debate. But what did they do? They wrote another report in which they continued with the same errors, and they just reduced it some more, and they made it 14.5%. And then they promoted that as the right number. And when they promoted that as the right number, they had a partnership with the International Meat Secretariat and the International Dairy Farm Federation. So it was an open partnership, okay, of the UNFAO with these organizations. Are we supposed to take that number seriously?
No.
Absolutely not. This is like saying, oh, the Marlboro scientists said that Marlboro Lights is good for you. This is exactly what they did, okay? And that's the number that everyone is using. And so when Jane asked me to go look at it, and I went through the results, and then I realized that even the Gurler and Anand number was undercounting. They were undercounting the amount of carbon that would be sequestered if the whole world goes vegan. Because our animals are grazing on 37% of the land area of the planet. Our animals are eating 4.5 times as much food as we eat, and they're only providing 15% of the food we eat. Okay, so they're using 37% of the land to just give us 15% of the food. And the rest of the food is coming from the cropland, which is only 10%. So do the numbers, and then you say, how much carbon is sequestered in grazing land for the animals? It is only 53 gigatons. So 37% of the land is storing only 53 gigatons of carbon. All of land is storing 2,500 gigatons. So if you can bring the grassland back to the average, you will sequester all the carbon you need to sequester to reverse climate change.
Why is there such hostility to that? This is what I don't understand. There's a solution to climate change that is right there, staring us in the face. We've basically mowed down a lot of the earth. Trees capture carbon, so therefore if we grew more trees and used some of the cattle grazing and land, 70% of soil is fed to farm animals, blah, 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 if we just grew that back to forest, we could sequester a lot of that carbon and essentially start reversing climate change now. But you've explained that there's no money in it, and so that's one of the reasons why it's not being embraced. Can you, and then I will be quiet, because these are the things that keep me up at night. Like, we have a solution to climate change, but people don't want to look at it. and it's not being formally recognized, which is why your white paper, when it gets published in a scientific journal, hopefully will be picked up.
Yeah, I mean, my explanation is that, there are a lot of industries now that are depending on exploiting animals, on promoting diseases, and destroying the planet. Those three are money-making ventures right now. They are in opposition to anything that says, throw the whole thing out and let's start over, which is really what we are saying when we say we want a system of normalized nonviolence. That's why veganism is such a revolutionary concept.
There's money in war, there's money in illness with pharmaceuticals, and there's, most of the antibiotics, by the way, are actually fed to farm animals, so there's money there too. So that does definitely speak largely to the resistance to change. But there's also belief systems. In some cases, people start deluding themselves and start rationalizing and saying, well, it can't really be that bad. And then you have the folks wanting to maintain the status quo whose interest is actually in confusing people. There's a film called Merchants of Doubt that talked about like the tobacco industry and how when there was evidence about cigarettes causing problems, how they then created confusing evidence similar to this 14.5% figure that's going around now. Our voice is kind of a minority point of view in this systemic, violent world. And now how do we normalize that without being marginalized? Because that is certainly the goal of those who want to maintain the status quo and continue profiting from it. And there are now starting to be folks profiting from plant-based agriculture, like Beyond and Impossible Burger and stuff like this. And so I wonder how does that interface, right? Because that's still in the capitalist world, but it is a different model that is certainly less destructive. And what roles do companies like that play? And then what other sorts of mechanisms or examples are there of the kind of world we want to create?
Yeah. So Deborah Fries has a TEDx video where she talks about how system change happens. And in any system change, there are 4 aspects that need to happen. So there are the illuminators, like people who make documentaries like Jane, who show what's wrong with the system and why we need to change it. So you need, movies like Conspiracy, What the Hell, that make people start thinking, there's something wrong with the way we're doing things now. So we need to change. So those are the illuminators. And then there are protectors, like the Beyond Meat, who are saying, here's the new way of doing things, and I'm going to do it in the old system.
And Gene.
Yeah, the protectors are important because they are making veganism normal, and they are supporting it within the current system. So then there are hospice workers, like Renee, who help the old die out and create a new out of the old. So they show that you don't have to be a cattle rancher, you can turn that into a farm sanctuary. So those are the hospice care workers. And then there are the trailblazers who are creating the new. So when all of these come together, you create a system change. So that's how system changes happen.
I'm unfortunately not a deep thinker, I have a shallow mind, but I do want to reiterate one thing about change. Change can take forever, but when it happens, it can happen at an extraordinary pace, as you mentioned with the internet. We look at area after area where things are one way and then suddenly they're another, and you look at the factors that cause that to happen. It occurs to me that rather than calling it animal agriculture, call it animal agri-torture. There's not much culture involved. There are so many advantages to moving to, or in the case of some of us, to be completely honest, I'm a vegan in training. I cut out a number of categories. It's been years since I ate beef or pork, and I'm sparing on everything else, but I'm not all the way there yet. Hopefully you'll invite me back in a couple of years and I'll say I'm there. Going vegan has all kinds of advantages. Addressing, I'm a one-note guy, addressing that unmet need for family planning. If that cost was equalized amongst all of us Americans to do what might be considered our fair share, it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you a nickel a week. I mean, it's a stunning number, and I've checked it carefully. The global deficit in terms of funding for these programs is $6 billion. That's more than I have in my wallet right now. But Apple is sitting on about $200 billion, and they earned it by producing devices we like. If you look at the world, the haves, and we're not the only country that qualifies, and not everybody here does, but if you split that amount out, it comes to about $2.50 per American per year. This is an achievable goal. A lot of these things, we're told they're impossible. They're told we can never happen. And then when you break them down, you realize they're much more achievable than they sometimes appear to be.
Talking about these systemic changes, there's a lot of comparisons to the work we're doing And not that long ago, people thought, we're just looking at energy, that coal would be here forever, and the idea that renewable energy would be cheaper than coal. Many thought we would never see this day. Similarly, we're looking for a big change to renewables. The change is coming whether people want it to or not. And so looking at that just transition for both of these industries is so crucial. Workers to training to people on the front lines who've been affected by all of this. But I think we have seen signs that big systemic change is definitely possible.
There are certain systems in place now and infrastructures in place, like for instance with the U.S. Department of Agriculture that spends billions of dollars every year to maintain the current status quo. What do we think about the idea of taking some of the billions of dollars that are going to dairy farms now and using that to transition some of these farms who are actually struggling and are going to likely go out of business anyway, to train them into new forms of plant-based agriculture? That's kind of using an existing machine system to tilt resource in a new direction. And are there many opportunities to take existing machines, or do we need a whole new, not necessarily machine, but cultural creation, co-created space?
Yeah, I mean, you need to create the new, but simultaneously you need to help the old transform into the new. Because it's not about creating a new completely separately from the old. Nation Rising is an organization in Canada. Basically, every year they go and they send these letters out to legislatures. They're creating this grassroots action to force Canadian government to match their words with their action. Because they have a food guide in which there is no dairy in the food guide. Okay? They eliminated dairy from the food guide because it is not a nutritious thing. Why are you then giving subsidies to the dairy industry? Shouldn't that subsidy go to the plant-based industry? Isn't that what your food guide is saying? You know, so it's about holding their feet to the fire, right? They're supposed to be our servants. They're supposed to be doing things for us. So it's about taking them up on their word.
And so what about businesses like, you know, Purdue, right, the chicken people, or JBS, who's the biggest meat company in the world? And they were actually recently at a plant-based conference.
Oh, we don't want
talking
plastic.
about this.
I don't want plastic.
Yeah.
Keep it away.
Good to pay attention to this stuff, for sure.
Thank you, though.
Yes,
Thank you for
yes.
your offer.
Why?
We appreciate you coming down.
At this conference, and there's this JBS person and a Purdue person talking about investing in plant-based agriculture. And it was really intriguing because the Purdue folks were representing that they are a family company. And the JBS people, are you dipping your toe into the water? The JBS person was being asked, and they said, well, we're not dipping our toe in. When we get in, it's going to be a cannonball. Which is sort of this violent language, right? And it's sort of in that world of profit and money-making and capitalism. How does that interface with this non-violent world that we're trying to create, I wonder?
I would like to weigh in on that.
I'm not anti-capitalist. You can have all the capitalism you want if you stop torturing and killing animals, polluting our water, and polluting our sky. In fact, when I go to a Veg Fest, I do a lot of shopping at Veg Fest because I can get products that are made in America by mom and pop shops. This is not capitalism. What we have is corporate fascism right now. We have corporations that are running our government. It's not private industry when the government subsidizes dairy, which people increasingly don't want, and shoves it down the throats of school children and prisoners. That's why in California we just passed a law that said prisons, institutions, and old people's homes have to have vegan options because they were forcing kids who are allergic to dairy, and they literally put it down and they open it up and they essentially force these children to eat it. So I think this whole thing about we're socialists and we're communists, no, I'm a capitalist. I was a Randian when I was 12 years old. I'm not a Randian anymore. God forbid, I went through puberty and I grew up and realized that was kind of a silly philosophy. But what I'm saying is this is not capitalism. It is a form of socialism. It's corporate socialism. The corporations run Congress, they run the USDA, they run the FDA, they run most of the agencies of government. And they're infiltrated. All the executives from the meat and dairy industry have gotten into the USDA. They run it. This is not capitalism, and it's not even democracy. It's become corporate fascism.
Whether we're trying to eliminate the mining of coal or whether we're trying to move away from dairy farms, as others have said, you have to give a thought to the decent people who have found themselves trapped in these industries and who want to make a nice living for their family, want to live on the land, want to live in their communities, And time and again, when we try to figure out how to manage that transition, we're always told the same thing. We can't do it, we don't have any money, we're broke. Well, let's look at that number for 1 second. The US has about a 22 trillion with a T dollar debt. Who do we owe that to? Anybody want to throw out a name? Nope. 2/3 of it is owed to us. We borrow the money from ourselves. Now, if we don't pay it back, I guess we can hire somebody to come break our kneecaps. But the point is, what's wrong with investing in yourself if you do it intelligently? Now, we don't always do it intelligently. You look at our military budget and all of that, and a lot of other things. But the point is, this pernicious idea that we can't afford to accelerate this transition by reflecting the needs of people who we don't want to have left behind, who become adversaries. I bet you that if you had gone into coal country and said, anybody here afraid of heights? You're 2,000 feet underground. How would you like to make more money 40 feet up in the air holding a wrench? Everybody'd sign up.
And I just want to say one other thing.
This whole idea that, well, businesses, we have to get this information to the key people at Google, at Facebook, at Twitter, the ones who are the change makers today, because we're not going to have business if it's 140 degrees. I tried to visit the Alamo recently, and I tried to walk 2 blocks to get there, and I was like, it's too hot, forget it. The Alamo's going to have to wait. And it's 140 degrees it hit in parts of India. We're having water shortages. Businesses are going to collapse. Tourism is going to collapse. It doesn't matter how many billions or what your profit increase is the next quarter if life has become unfunctional because life is too hot on this planet for humans to comfortably survive. And then, of course, if you go into air conditioning, that just accelerates climate change. So we're going to hit a point where even the most strident resistors are going to realize, hey, we're all out of business. Ecological apocalypse affects all of us. It's not going to leave anybody behind. It doesn't matter if you're the 0.1%.
You know, we're all on the planet together, we share it together, and there's also politically the Green New Deal that's being discussed now. And there may be opportunities to incorporate these issues in the Green New Deal as well. And is anybody working on that? Like, I know there's this new ranchers group for the Green New Deal. I'm not sure if they're anti-factory farming. I'm not sure if they're pro-vegan yet. So does anybody know the status of that?
This is coming on so fast, and it's not top down. There's nobody managing this. It's bottom up. That's really extraordinary. So it's not a standard management model, and that's probably all to the good.
You know, I completely agree. The grassroots is really important.